Hi, and welcome back to the shop. So I have a confession to make. I did a video on the spice rack that I'd been working on, and my lack of knowledge about computers and things like that. Due to that, I lost the entire video. So there were some pieces and things where I was doing the mortising that I still have some little short pieces on my phone in order to put together a little preview of that. So now that I've gotten this a good 3/4 of the way down, check this fit here, and it looks pretty good. So let's clean it out a little. I think I can go down a little bit more on this end here, and we'll be ready to go. So now I'm just cleaning up this side there, straightening it out. That side looks okay. I'm going to trim off this, make sure there's nothing on this side and this side. And if your chisels are fairly sharp, at this point you don't need the mallet, because if your chisels are nice and sharp, you're just basically shearing off those walls. So now I'm going to fit this to this because I like this. So I don't know if you can see this, but you see where the saw cuts are. I have these little marks here. So in order for this to fit in nice and smoothly, I want to take those down and flatten them so that I'm working off a nice clean surface. So I'm just very low angle working across these little high saw marks and getting it a little smoother. I could do this with a shoulder plane too, but this is such a small amount that I'm just kind of doing it by hand here. Just getting that surface nice and smooth. So I've got this hole pretty well cut, but I'm not really sure exactly whether it's deep enough. So I'm using a depth gauge and putting that in the hole, rod all the way down, and then I tighten this up, and that'll tell me how deep the hole is, and I can use it to check around and make sure it's all consistent. It looks like this corner right here is a little high, so I need to take that corner down a little bit. And now we can compare it to our tenon, and we see that our tenon is about a 1/16 inch, still too long. So we either deepen this or we just trim off that little bit off the tenon. I'm going to clean this hole out, this little mortise a little bit more and see if we can't fit it further down. So we can see we're still a little snug right there. So rather than using a shoulder plane, which I just did a little bit to flatten that, I just want to take off just a little high. So what I do is I take my chisel and I put it against my stomach, and then I just aim her nice and flat, and I use by leaning forward just to clean up that little tiny ledge. And the body actually gives me more control. And now we can see that's coming in. It's still a little snug, but I don't think it's on this side, so we're going to switch over to the other side and do the same thing right there and right there. That is pretty good. I think that'll be okay. Yeah. So here we have the two that we've just cut. This is our bottom rail, and you can see up here where the tops are going to go, and this is about the gap that we want all the way down. So this will come out just a hair, and the grain looks good that it's following through, so that'll be fine. We still have to do the mortises and for these on each side, and we already have the rabbet here ready for the glass, and on these, and we did those first so we know where to cut them on this piece on the back side. So this is all looking fairly nice and flat. I'm going to be able to plane these down because the doors are thicker. I left everything thicker than what I needed, so I'm not too afraid if I get a little bit of out of flush right here and here. And on these other pieces, this we're going to have to fill and deal with, but we want it to look a bit more natural. So the next step is going to be to work out the distance here that we want this to be mortised into this end. These are cut long so that when this goes in, I have enough here because I'm going to do sort of a chamfered stop here and on this side. They'll just be long enough to be outside and have this sort of look. And then this is going to be a little longer than the cabinet so that she can pull from here and not have to have a pull on the door. Trying to keep it as clean as possible. Then we'll have to deal with those two pieces next. So here are my new marks for the new mortise that I'm going to cut. And some people drill these out and then trim that in, but what I do is I line up my mortising chisel on the line with the flat side toward the outside, and I give it a tap, and I do the same thing on the other side, and I give it a tap. And the reason I use the flat side is that I'm not wanting to create a bevel on the outside and damage this line. Now I can come back and I can clean up this space going back to my clean line, and I can do the same thing on this side. Well, now I've got my two outside lines to work towards, and I can start cleaning out the inside of the mortise without fear of damaging this outside portion. So I just keep working my way down a little bit further and then coming back and working towards that same line. Now, here's a little trick about these chisels. On the flat, if I go in like this, it's going to follow that straight line. If I were to turn this way and come in here, it would want to dig in. But because I'm turning it with the flat side down, then what happens is, as I come in here, it will want to travel across, and I can control that by how hard I tap and how I move the chisel. Okay, so we've got these 3 mortises done, and what I've used to line this up, because we have to do this one over here, is I put a square against the existing cabinet so that that's flush, and the same thing up here. And then once I have this gap set, and I've got that lined up with the center of the cabinet, I use this against here to align this one up here and down here. And then all I have to do is transfer these lines where this tenon is going into this piece here. And then that will tell me where I need to cut this mortise. In order to put together a little preview of that. But what I really concentrated a lot on were 2 parts that were harder to do and required different tools. Now this is these are the stiles for the door, and I was able to do this rabbet here, or rebate here, very easily using one of the plow planes or one of my rabbet planes. So that was very simple because it's open on this end and it's open on this end, so you can go straight across. The difficulty came when I had to do these rabbets here that have a stop on each side, because on the back of these doors where they come together, where the glass fits in, you see the rabbet comes down and it extends over here, but it doesn't go out this end, so you can't do this part the same way you do that part. So so I did all the work, and I filmed it all, and I was hoping to show you the video, and I lost it. So this is in a way to make up for that stage of the process, because we still have the molding to do on the front and everything. But I wanted to show you, these are the mortises that have already been cut and ready, but I had to hollow out this portion here. And I still need to do a little cleanup of it. And that'll be done by hand very easily. So, and the bottom was just a square in mortise, and with stop, and the top was a curved, because it had to match this line here. So in doing that process, I used chisel, mallet, and I used in particular these router planes that I have in front of you. Them are better or different, how they're different, and what the preferences are. So this video here will be more about this, and it's sort of a repeat of what I was saying earlier. So let me start by showing you a little closer version of this rabbet that I had to do. You see it's curved here, and this is where that glass will sit. Here are the 2 mortises from the rail and for the door. They'll fit in there, and then this is the extension of that. This part will be cut off later. So we needed to cut this piece in here, and so the way I started it was, see if I can show you this, is I used this little saw here to cut depth here and thickness there to get started, and I did the same thing over here, and then I cleaned that up with a chisel and a mallet and just squaring this corner up. But then I still had to clean out all of this here, and that's where the router comes in. So these are all different types of routers. These are all by Stanley, and they were made by other companies as well. This is called a hag's tooth router, and generally they were made by a craftsman. This would be the name of the person that made it, and it's obviously made out of a stair rail, and that's very common. And it's just got a blade coming through with a wedge, and you can see here's where it comes through. There's no escapement for the shaving to come off, so these tend to clog, but they're really done for roughing out a lower section of a mortise or a carving or something. And these are rather old, and people have come up with new ways of solving the same problems. And that's more of this style, which is the newer routers. That being said, here's a specialty router. This one is number 171 Stanley, and you can see there's the company name, and you can see it has two handles here, and it has two screws on the base here, so you could put a board across there if you want. And the fence is here on the bottom, and here's the blade. The interesting thing about this type of router is it was specifically made for mortising hinges and on doors, on door jambs. And it's interesting because this blade goes either in this is the sharp edge here, and you can switch it over so it's a deeper cut and it extends out further. But you can also turn this around and have it aiming that way, so the sharp edge is here. Or you can have it coming forward or back. So when you're using this router, you can do it this way along a board, or this way, either way. And with the fence, it's perfect for cleaning out mortises for hinges and things. The way the blade turns around is this mechanism. It looks more complicated than it really is, but you can see you loosen this, and you loosen this one here so you can adjust the depth of it up and down. And if you want to turn the blade, you just push this button in, and you see the blade can be spun around to go in the other direction, and then that clicks in as a stop. These are rarer to find and therefore more expensive, but they're useful, and they basically work the same way with a rod going down and a cutter offset, the same way these others are. If you look at these, you see these, the way these are designed is it's a stepped foot that's goes parallel with your work, and this is perpendicular to your work. And the same thing with this one, but the difference is that this is a spear point and this is a straight chisel point. The other thing about these two is they have this little notch here, and the interesting thing about that is that points these to being in a more modern router that has an adjustment for depth. And you'll see that on these two routers. One of them does not require this notch because it never had a depth adjuster. And that's the flaw with the older ones. And it was an improvement when they came out with the adjuster. So this is a Type 1, number 71, Stanley, with the patent date here, 1884, Stanley marking here, and two knobs for control. Here's your flat sole that you work off of, and there's that same cutter with the flat chisel point on it. And the way this one works is you have a round arc here so you could follow a curve, and you have a flat surface on this side so you could follow a straight line. Now, that seems counterintuitive because your blade's going this way, but this is designed, and the reason this is a square here is because the blade can be turned and go this way with the work. And otherwise, it can be moved over to here and have none of this armature here in the way of the cutter if the cutter is coming out the back. But you see, in order to adjust the depth of cut, which is controlled by the distance between the blade and this flat surface, is you have to take this and loosen it, and then you move this up by hand to whatever height you want. And the problem with that is that you really want to be able to adjust it a little bit at a time so that you're not taking too deep a cut. And the difficulty is setting that so that it's accurate. Now, what I do is I put a little shim underneath here just to drop it down a little further. Then I pull the shim out, and that'll control me and how I get the depth that I want. But in the newer version, and it's the same number, there's a couple of differences. Let me go back to this because I want to show you again. You see, this is the throat here, and this has a bridge across here, so it's closed. The difficulty is that it's hard to see the shavings. This kind of gets in your way, but they solved that later with the 71 by opening the throat. You see, it's got an arched bridge here, which opens it up and makes it easier to see the work. This piece here is called a mouth closer, and it's used as a depth stop and as a mouth closer going back across here. And there's some disputes and arguments about the real purpose of this piece and how useful it really is. But the most useful thing about this one versus the other, you see it still has that flat portion to run against, and it still has the round portion. And that mouth closer, if you put that there, will allow you to follow that line. But this has this mechanism, and that's the important part, because what it does is it goes in that notch that we were talking about, and that means that you can loosen this, and then you can micro adjust by a quarter turn or half turn or several turns how much you want to move that blade up or down away from this surface. The other thing that has been added is there's an alternative fence here that can come on and off, and it can also be used to take the router around a pivot point like this, or to follow this way against something else. So this is an accessory that was not available in the older version. So when you're looking at routers to buy, you might want to consider some of these things will make it easier for you to use. So I want to show you what we're doing here. And this is the same thing that we had to do with the parts for the doors. And you see it's a rabbet that we need to cut in here. And it has a certain amount of depth and in both directions. But it stops. So you can't just run a rabbet plane or a plow plane or a filister across here to make this notch, because it has to stop there. So that's why I chose to use the router in this instance. Now, if I put it in the vise, and let me make sure you can see that. You see, here's the piece. I could run the router this way, turning the blade, if I put a fence here for it to ride against, and that would give me control about how far to go this way. This way, I'm using the depth adjuster to decide, but I'm not going to use a board to do that. What I did was I came in here with a chisel. I first took a saw, like I showed in the video, and I cut from base point to base point, a notch, and then I came in with a chisel and I cleaned up that little section to make myself a square corner. Then I came and I just defined this outer line here with this larger chisel. I used the smaller chisel to do this portion here. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use the router to clean that line up. So here I have the older router, and what I did was I set it on top of the board and then ran it next to it to determine the depth of the blade and how much it's going to cut. And so I have a defined edge back here, but on this point, I'm not going to take this all the way down and try to cut this whole piece out at one time. So I just bring the blade down a little bit. And I've found that if you skew the blade like this and do a cut, it gives you a better finished product. I could come through here and just push my way through, but depending on the grain of the board, I could cause a lot of tear out. So what I choose to do is I choose to use this little point in a slicing action and that gives me more control, and you'll see how it cuts. I just take a little bit at a time, and you see how it's working its way through there. Take off this piece. I can come back here as well, and I can bring it back this way depending on the grain. Now this seems a little awkward to me right now, only because I'm having to do this with the camera in my way. But you can see how it works, and what it's doing is, and I'll show you this a little closer, is it's producing a nice flat surface. And in the corner here I can come back, and depending on how deep my chisel mark is, you see I'm sliding it. I'm doing that slicing action that I talked about. Okay, so there you go. And you can see that it's produced a nice level surface there. Let me bring the camera in so you can see closer. So you see how smooth this is now. And if it doesn't cut, if it's not making a cut at all, you see there's a little bit there, just a little sliver. If it's not making a cut at all, it means that you've gone deep enough. And now we need to reset this blade and get it a little bit further down, so that we can continue down into our mortise. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the larger chisel again, and I'm going to I can now put it up against that shoulder, and I can run a line a little further down, and so that'll be my new line for what I'm going to. And I can do the same thing on the ends, and that'll prevent me from breaking off these further points, because we don't want to do that. And you see that just keeps that nice clean edge in there, so that all we're doing now is going to take off this base part. So in order to lower this, well, I have to loosen this and then bring it here along the edge and retighten it, and I have very little control over how much depth I've allowed for it to go, because of having to move it down like that. Whereas this one, you can see, has that knob to control it by. So I've already set this down a little lower, so let's clean this up. Let me see if you can see that. I approach it again from the side, and I don't come all the way in like this, because I don't want to cause any kind of peeling because of this grain. So I do a nice slicing motion along the side, and I keep my this is pushing down, and I'm using kind of my body weight to apply the force, and you can see how nice even the shaving is that's coming off. And then I can come back in here and just kind of clean up what I might have missed and work it back this way. See, it doesn't like that direction because of the grain of the wood. So I'm going to stick with this, and you can see that's giving me a nice level surface, and I can judge it because this won't cut any further down than the blade is allowed to get to. So now here's my adjustment. All I have to do is loosen this here, and then just run this down in just a hair, tighten this back up, and now I can check, and I can see that it's ready to cut again. And I've only moved it down maybe a 64th of an inch, and because of that it's very easy to go a little further down, and you can see how nicely the cut is. I'm trying to stay out of the way of the camera, so it's a little awkward, but I'll run back this way a little bit and clean this up. it's a nice level surface that it produces. And I've managed to do it without getting a whole bunch of tear out or breaking my two ends of my rabbet. And so that's how I did the other one. In the case of the round part in the curve, then I just defined that the same way and worked my way into that. So there you have it. That's pretty much what I was talking about with the routers, and I hope I've been able to cover some of that at least. So again, I apologize for losing that video, but I hope I've covered some of the aspects of the routers in this video. The doors are almost done. The next thing that we have to do is to put a molding on the inside, which we're just going to do a simple chamfer. We'll use a number 72 chamfer plane, and then we need to go to assembling them, sanding them, finishing them, and getting the glass put in them, and then fitting the hinges. So it's funny, it seems like a really simple project, but all the different stages that you have to go through sometimes can become tedious. But the trick with really accomplishing something in woodworking, I think, is just taking each step at a time and not getting anxious to finish the work and have the completed piece. You have to have the patience to just go through each step, and these tools make it easier for you to do that. And that's kind of the fun part about collecting them as well, is that you're collecting something that's useful and something you can learn from as well. And these older ones are really great because they have a certain history about them that you're adding to when you use them. These this one here belonged to my father. This one I collected, but this is the one I really enjoy using because it's a repetition of some of the work that my father did. I hope this video is not too contrived and all awkward because of the change in the format. Hopefully when we get back to putting the hinges on the doors and everything, we can go to a straight format that's just sort of straight and simple, one beginning to end, and I'll figure out all this video stuff. You can see I'm better at woodworking than I am about doing the video. So again, I apologize for that. I hope you'll subscribe to my channel and keep watching, and I hope you get something out of it. I think this one here might be a little bit boring, but we'll get through it. Thanks again for coming to the shop.